I grew up in Bozeman, Montana, the kind of place where you know your neighbors by their truck, not their last name. My dad ran a small plumbing supply business and spent his weekends coaching Little League. My mom taught third grade for 31 years and still sends Christmas cards to former students. That's the world I came from. Quiet, decent, nothing fancy. I met my wife at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue when I was 26. She was laughing at something, head thrown back, completely unself-conscious, and I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so comfortable just being alive. Her name was Diane. She worked as a physical therapist at a sports medicine clinic and had this way of listening to people that made them feel like the most important person in the room. We dated for 2 years, got married at a state park outside of town, and built a life together the way most people do. Slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of love in the cracks. Our son came along 4 years into the marriage. We named him Ethan. He was born 3 weeks early, which terrified us both. But he came out screaming and healthy, and he hasn't slowed down since. Watching him grow up was the best thing that ever happened to me. I coached his soccer team for 6 straight seasons. I taught him how to change a tire when he was 15. I sat in the front row at every school concert, even the ones that sounded like cats arguing. I worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm. Good, steady work. I designed building foundations and bridge supports, the invisible parts of things that hold everything else up. There's something satisfying about that kind of work, knowing that something you calculated on paper is now keeping 1,000 people safe without any of them ever thinking about it. Diane and I weren't perfect, but we were solid. At least, that's what I believed. In the later years, when Ethan got older and left for college, we lost some of the daily rhythm that had held us together. The school runs, the sports schedules, the shared exhaustion of raising a kid. Without all that noise filling the house, things got quieter between us. I told myself it was just the adjustment everyone goes through when their nest empties. Diane seemed a little distant sometimes, but she'd always been independent. I respected that about her. I never looked for reasons to worry. I should have looked. It was a Tuesday evening in October when I found out. I'd come home early from a site visit because a meeting got rescheduled and the house was empty, or I thought it was. Diane's car was in the driveway, which was odd because she was supposed to be at the clinic until 6. I called out her name. No answer. I walked into the kitchen and saw her phone on the counter, screen lit up with a message preview. I wasn't trying to snoop. The name just caught my eye. It was someone from her office. The preview said enough. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time. I don't know how long. The refrigerator hummed. A car went by outside. I put my bag down on the chair and just stood there, reading that one line on the screen over and over, trying to find another way to understand it. Diane came downstairs a few minutes later in different clothes than she'd been wearing that morning. She stopped when she saw me standing there. She looked at the phone on the counter. Then she looked at me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did I. Finally, she said, "I was going to tell you." I asked her how long. She said 7 months. 7 months. Ethan had come home for spring break during those 7 months. We had celebrated our anniversary during those 7 months. I had bought her flowers for her birthday during those 7 months. I asked her who it was. She told me it was someone named Greg, a colleague at the clinic, a physical therapist like her, a few years younger. She said it hadn't been planned. She said things had gotten complicated. She used words like disconnected and unfulfilled, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I heard all of them, and I felt none of them. I was somewhere behind my own eyes, watching the conversation happen from very far away. I slept in the guest room that night. And the night after that, I didn't eat much for the first few days. I went to work because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And sitting at a drafting table making calculations felt like the only thing in my life that still made sense. Numbers don't lie. Angles hold. That's more than I could say for anything else right then. About a week in, I called my brother. His name is Seth, and he's 4 years older than me and has always been the person I go to when I can't think straight. He drove 4 hours from Billings without me even asking him to, showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with a bag of groceries and said, "You look terrible." I told him everything. He sat there at my kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which is not something Seth is known for, and when I finished, he said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" That question was the first time I had any clarity, because I realized I didn't want to fight for the marriage. I wasn't angry in a way that wanted to fix something. I was just done. Whatever Diane and I had been building for 19 years had quietly become something I didn't recognize, and maybe that had been happening for a long time. And I had just been too busy holding up the invisible parts of everything to notice the visible parts crumbling. I told Seth I wanted to get through this cleanly, protect whatever relationship I could still have with Ethan, and figure out who I was on the other side of it. Seth called his attorney friend the next day. Her name was Patricia Holloway. She was in her early 50s. Efficient, direct, no patience for drama, and absolutely the right person for the situation. She met with me twice before I told Diane I wanted a divorce, and by the time I had that conversation, I knew exactly what my position was and what I was and wasn't entitled to. Patricia told me to document everything and say nothing that could be used against me. I followed her advice to the letter. Telling Diane I wanted to divorce her was a strange conversation. I had expected it to be explosive. It wasn't. She cried. She said she was sorry, not for the affair, I think, but for how things had ended up. I told her I hoped she'd be happy eventually. I meant it. I had been married to her for 19 years. I didn't want her to suffer. I just couldn't stay. What came next was the part that nearly broke me. Ethan took it hard. He was 22, just finishing his last year of college, and when I called him, he went very quiet in a way that scared me more than if he'd yelled. He asked me if I had known for a long time. I told him no. He asked me if his mother had told me who. I said yes. There was a long silence, and then he said, "She introduced me to Greg at that thing at the clinic last spring." He had met the man, at a work event, while his mother was sleeping with him. He didn't say anything after that, just told me he'd call me back, and it was 4 days before he did. When he finally called, he was calmer, but something in him was different, tighter, like something had closed off. He said he loved us both and he wasn't going to choose sides, but he needed some time to process everything. I told him that was fine. I told him to take whatever time he needed and that I wasn't going anywhere. Those months while the divorce was processing were the loneliest of my life. Seth checked in on me constantly. A few people from work knew something was off, but were too polite to ask directly. I went through the motions, woke up, went to work, came home, ate something, tried to sleep. I lost about 18 pounds without trying to. There was one person who became unexpectedly important during that time. Her name was Joanna Mercer, no relation to anyone at the firm. She was a project coordinator we'd brought on to manage a large public works contract, and she had started working with our team about 6 weeks before everything with Diane fell apart. She was organized, quick, had a sense of humor about the chaos that comes with large construction projects, and she was one of those people who was easy to be around without you fully understanding why. She was 44, had been through her own divorce 3 years prior, and she had come out the other side of it in a way that was visibly intact. You could see it in the way she operated. No bitterness, just someone who had recalibrated and kept going. She didn't know about my situation at first. I didn't talk about it at work. But one afternoon she needed me to review some load calculations, and we ended up talking for an hour about something else entirely. And by the end of it, she said, very simply, "You seem like someone carrying something heavy." I didn't deny it. She didn't push. But after that, when the workday ended and the building emptied out, we sometimes sat in the conference room with bad coffee and just talked. About work. About Ethan. About what divorce does to a person's sense of time. How you suddenly can't picture the future the way you used to. She told me about her own divorce. Her ex-husband had been a good man in a lot of ways, she said, just not a good husband, and they had both been miserable for years before they admitted it. She said the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or dividing the furniture. It was learning to stop defining herself by what she had lost. She said it took a long time to understand that the person who comes out the other side of a hard thing is usually someone worth meeting. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. The divorce was finalized in the spring, about 8 months after I had found out. Patricia had done her job well. The settlement was fair by any measure. We split the equity in the house, divided the savings cleanly, and agreed on a framework for how we'd handle things going forward. Diane moved in with Greg. I stayed in the house for 2 more months before I decided it was full of the wrong memories and sold it. The night the divorce was final, Seth drove up again and we sat on my back porch and drank too much bourbon, and he told bad jokes until I was laughing even when I didn't want to be. That was the best gift he could have given me. Ethan came around slowly. He called more regularly as the months passed. He was still careful with his words, still protective of his own feelings in a way I understood completely. But he was there. He came for Thanksgiving, and we ate a slightly burnt turkey together and watched football, and it was imperfect and quiet and exactly what I needed. At some point during the afternoon, he said, "I'm glad you're doing okay, Dad." I told him I was getting there. He nodded like he believed me, which helped me believe it too. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Joanna and I had dinner. Not a work dinner, just dinner. We talked for 3 hours. At the end of the night, standing in the parking lot, she said she had enjoyed herself. And I said I had too, and there was a pause. The way there is when two adults are being honest with each other without saying all the words yet. We took things slowly. She had her own rhythms and I had mine, and neither of us was in a hurry to prove anything. But slowly, over the following months, something real grew between us. She had a daughter from her marriage. 17, sharp. A little suspicious of me at first, which I respected. And I was careful and patient with that relationship because I understood what it meant. Joanna came to 2 of Ethan's soccer league games the following summer. Ethan liked her. He told me later she had said something to him during halftime about not being there to replace anyone, just to be her own person in his father's life. He said that meant something to him. I found out what happened to Greg about a year after the divorce. His wife. I had not known he had one, and I do not think Diane had either, or maybe she had, and had decided not to look at it too closely, had found out about the affair, not just with Diane. There had been others. The clinic dismissed him after an internal review because some of the conduct had crossed professional lines with patients. He lost his license pending investigation. Last I heard, he was living in a different state, working some job that had nothing to do with medicine. Diane was not with him when all this came out. I heard about it through a mutual friend, not through Diane directly. She and I don't have much contact anymore, just the occasional logistical conversation that Ethan's life makes necessary sometimes. The anger I thought I'd carry for a long time faded faster than I expected. Not because what she did was acceptable, but because holding on to it required energy I needed for other things. The hardest conversation I ever had with Ethan was about 2 years after the divorce. He had come home for a long weekend, and on the last evening after dinner, he asked me if I had ever suspected something was wrong with his mother and me before everything happened. I was honest with him. I told him I had noticed we were drifting and had chosen to believe it was temporary. That I had trusted the stability of what we built so completely that I hadn't paid close enough attention to the signs it was eroding. I told him that was on me, not just on her. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I think you were just being the kind of person who believes in things." I didn't know what to say to that. I still think about it. Joanna and I got engaged quietly about 18 months after that first dinner. No big announcement. We told Seth, told her daughter, called Ethan. Ethan asked me if I was happy. I told him I genuinely was. He said, "Good. That's all I've got then." We got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside of Bozeman. Just family and a handful of close friends. Seth gave a toast that was funny and embarrassing in equal measure. Joanna's daughter stood up with us. Ethan was my best man. I was 53 years old and starting over and standing there in that vineyard. I didn't feel like a man who had lost something. I felt like a man who had finally stopped letting fear of change do his thinking for him. There's a kind of grief that doesn't have a clear name. The grief you feel for a future you had already imagined in detail. The house you thought you'd grow old in. The holidays you thought would always look a certain way. That grief is real. And I won't pretend it wasn't, but grief and growth can exist at the same time, which is something I had to learn from scratch at 50 years old, which is maybe late, but it's not too late. Joanna and I work together in the same firm now. She was offered a director position, which was completely deserved, and we have gotten very good at keeping professional and personal in their own lanes. Ethan got serious with someone and brought her home last Christmas. She was warm and kind and laughed at all of Seth's bad jokes, which is my primary benchmark for character. Joanna's daughter left for college in the fall, nervous and excited, the way they all are. I still do the same work, calculating the invisible parts, figuring out what's needed underneath to hold everything up. But I think about it differently now. Foundations matter. The things you build on matter, and sometimes a structure has to come down completely before you can understand what it actually needed from the beginning. I don't have a clean moral to offer. Life didn't wrap up neatly because it never does. Diane and Greg didn't ride off together into a happy ending, and I'm not going to pretend I got zero satisfaction from knowing that. But I also didn't spend years celebrating someone else's failure. There's too much to do. Ethan needs a father who's present, not one who's still fighting old battles. Joanna deserves a partner whose eyes are forward. I deserve that too, even though it took losing almost everything I thought I had to figure it out. If someone had told me at 50 years old that the worst year of my life would also be the year I finally understood what I actually wanted, I would not have believed them. But here I am. And here, it turns out, is a pretty good place to be. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in some abstract philosophical way, just practically, the way an engineer thinks about it. Every load has a consequence. Every decision transfers weight somewhere. And if you build something on a foundation that's been quietly failing, eventually the structure tells you. Diane made her choices over 7 months. 7 months of lying to me, to Ethan, to herself, and what happened wasn't punishment handed down from somewhere. It was just the natural consequence of what she had built with Greg. He wasn't faithful to her. He wasn't faithful to anyone. He had used his position to take advantage of people who trusted him, and when that finally caught up to him, he lost everything that came from it. His license, his standing, eventually her. Not because the universe intervened, because that's what happens when you build something on deception. It cannot hold. I think about Ethan a lot when I consider what this whole period actually cost. He was 22 when his understanding of his parents' marriage collapsed, and that's an age when you're still using your family as a kind of reference point for what relationships are supposed to look like. What he had to watch instead was a man he respected, his mother's colleague, someone she'd introduced him to at a work event, turn out to be the reason his family fell apart. That damage is real, and it didn't come from me, and it didn't come from the divorce. It came from the original decision to deceive. What I'm most grateful for, looking back, is that Seth answered the phone. Not because he fixed anything, he didn't, but because having one person who sits across the table from you and asks, "What do you actually want?" cuts through a lot of noise. I have been so focused on what was happening to me that I hadn't stopped to ask myself what I wanted to happen next. That question changed my direction. Intelligence, I've come to believe, isn't about having the right answers immediately. It's about knowing which question to ask when everything is loud and nothing is clear. Joanna taught me something different. She showed me what it looks like to come through a hard thing without letting it calcify into bitterness. She hadn't forgotten what her marriage cost her, but she wasn't spending her energy on it either. That's a form of discipline I had to learn deliberately, because my instinct was to hold on to the anger longer than it was useful. There's a difference between processing something honestly and rehearsing your grievance until it becomes your identity. She knew the difference. I had to learn it. I'm 53. Ethan is going to be a father before I'm 60. Joanna is sitting in the next room right now, working on something, occasionally laughing at whatever she's reading. Seth still calls every Sunday and still tells the same bad jokes. None of this was the life I planned. It's better in the ways that matter and harder in the ways I didn't expect, but I showed up for it. For Ethan, for myself, for whatever came next. And that, I think, is the only version of courage that's actually available to regular people. Not the dramatic kind, just the daily kind. The kind where you get up and make the call and keep going. That's what I'd want him to understand when he's old enough to ask me what I learned. That the foundation matters. That honesty compounds over time in both directions. And that who you are when things fall apart is the truest thing about you.